Thank you for the introduction. As I said, I want to talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion. Obviously, and I put this in all the stuff as far as promotions, everything. Obviously, I'm not an expert in diversity and inclusion. There are people who go to college for it. There's people who do some things. And I think if you looked at, if there was a definition of, the old joke about the dictionary definition of diversity, if my picture was there, it would have an arrow pointing, not this. I'm an old white guy. Okay, so we just get that one out of the way. But what I've been able to find out is I've been able to find out some things about diversity. I've been able to find some things out about inclusion through the work that I do. And I think that these things are actually are worthwhile paying attention to. So we're going to go into those in a little bit. There's only 11 slides, so I'll probably get done with plenty of time, and we can hash out some more stories and other things. But I want to tell you a story about diversity. This comes to this particular story is about the New York Philharmonic, that's why we have this lovely picture of a symphony orchestra. 1969, there was a racial discrimination lawsuit against the New York Philharmonic, and what they found, this was a racial discrimination suit, and that they weren't getting enough racial diversity, and so they had to, by law, do some things to try to address this racial disparity. And what they needed to do in this particular thing was to remove any cues as to the person's gender or race when they were doing their auditions. And I think some of you are familiar with this. There are different things that orchestras have done over the years. One of them is, instead of facing the stage so that they can see the candidates and then obviously have some biases, they'll turn around. One of the ways is they'll sit behind a screen. It came to be that they went so far as not only doing some of those things, but also putting carpet on the stage. And the gentlemen might not understand this, but I think the ladies do, because even if you weren't looking at the person who was playing their instrument, you could hear the high heels clicking over the stage. And when they went to these kind of lengths to hide the gender and the racial makeup of the people who were auditioning, they found some interesting things. So I'm going to read some of the things that they found. Over time, the proportion of women grew from a very small percentage to 44%. So while these were originally, these protections were originally put in place to counter racism, they also address the bias against women. Using data from the records, researchers found that blind auditions increase the probability that a woman would advance from preliminary rounds by 50%. So again, removing any prior notion of gender or race. The likelihood of a woman's ultimate selection is increased several fold, although the competition is extremely difficult and the chance of anyone succeeding is low. This is pretty interesting. And I think there's some things that we can learn from this when we're looking at how do we hire people. And I'm talking particularly because I'm up here in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is actually a pretty diverse area. And we do have a lot of companies up here who claim to want to have a better diversity and inclusion. So I think there's some things to learn here. I'll talk about that later. They did similar things in similar studies with, again, these kind of gender blind and race blind submissions. There was a time with the Hubble telescope and getting time with the Hubble telescope. And they tracked it, and what they found is that, based on the proposals alone and removing all reference to bias, to gender or race, so that there were more women who were included in something like this. This is also something that they found in coding, which is near and dear to my heart, being in the software development industry and working with software developers, that when the gender was not known, women's code to what they call open source projects was accepted more often when the gender was not known, as opposed to the gender being known ahead of time. So what's my perspective? We have numbers as far as diversity that any company in Silicon Valley and San Francisco Bay Area would be jealous to have. Some of these Katrine talked about. We have now with this, we have our last class of this cohort tomorrow morning. When we finish it, we'll have over 1,000 participants who've completed our class and received awards. So these are big numbers. This is not small numbers. And the numbers have held true for a very long time. Over 60% of our participants are women. Why is that when other places can't get that kind of percentage? We have over 50% of our participants identify as non-white. So there's racial diversity. Average age is generally around 43. I think it's actually creeping up. So we have actually age diversity. We have people all the way from the age of, I believe the youngest person in our class right now is 20. And the oldest person is over 65. I'm not going to say how much over. And we have been fairly successful at helping people get jobs. We train them on Agile and Scrum through a class called the Agile MBA. We have other programs that we do. Before the pandemic, we were seeing about 40% of the people we were able to track and keep track of getting jobs within 90 days. So again, these are some wonderful things happening, and it's not about the money, right? It's not about the money. There's something that we're doing differently that has nothing to do with money, because I'm going to talk about the money factor. And again, we're one of the leanest nonprofits that you could ever find. We operate on a budget of about $10,000 a year. We're an all volunteer organization. And so we are able to achieve these things, not through money or any other thing. It's through some very simple things, actually. I think dollar for dollar, we're probably the best nonprofit organization that you can find. I'm a little biased, but for that $10,000 a month, which is about in some places in the Bay Area, rent for a month. For that money, we're able to give away over $2.5 million worth of training so far. So before I get into what have we done and why have we been so successful, and what lessons are there maybe for others to learn from this, I want to talk a little bit about, and this is from Dave. Dave Brawlings, the co-founder. We're both very interested in underserved communities and other things, and he pulled up some of these statistics for something else we were doing, sent them to me, and I thought, this is great, thank you. There was a Deloitte study in January 2018, so not that long ago. This is what they found. Organizations with inclusive cultures. So we're talking about, not only diversity, but inclusion. Not only we have people with diverse backgrounds, but we actually, give them some say in the organization. They're 2 times as likely to meet or exceed financial targets, 3 times as likely to be high performing, 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile. I don't know what they mean by agile. It's probably something different than I mean, but that's okay. It's a good thing. 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes. And all of this information, by the way, some of you know me and trust me. Some of you know me and don't trust me. Some of you don't know me at all, don't trust me. We'll give you the slides and we'll give you the links, right? There's another study that my good friend Dave passed on to me from McKinsey back from 2015, but I think it's still here. Gender diverse companies are 15% more likely to outperform. Ethnically diverse companies are 25% more likely to outperform. This is not just a good thing. It's more than a good thing. I mean, in the class, I talk about this book called The Goal, where the goal of any for-profit company is to make profit today and in the future. If that's your goal, or should be your goal, you should have diversity and inclusion, because the numbers are there. I mean, we see it all right and left and center. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here. I think you all get this. I think you all know this. When we have diversity and inclusion, we do better, not just because it is better for society and is better for the people in society, but because the company is going to make more money. It's a business decision, right? Let's keep that in mind. I added this one. So survey says, how well are we actually doing? Right? This is the other part of the stuff that my friend Dave sent to me. And that same McKinsey study that shows that it's the right thing to do financially. The 436 companies, this is no small study, that's a lot of companies, have increased their gender representation on their executive teams by only 2 percentage points. It's a good thing. We barely moved the needle. 2 percentage points, that's nothing. To 14%. They went from 12% to 14%. That's almost a rounding error. Ethnic and cultural diversity has changed by 1 percentage point from 12 to 13%. Again, almost a rounding error. And what's more, this is another conclusion of the study, many companies are still uncertain as how they can effectively use D&I to support their growth and value creation goals. We know this, we're not doing it, right? This is where I come in with this concept of virtue signaling. We say we want something, but yet we seem not to do anything to make it better. Another study found among high-tech executives, 50% of employees were white, 36% were Asian American, 1.6% were Hispanic, and less than 1% were African American. Another study, again, numbers, how poorly we do at this. Just 1% of tech leadership is Black and 2% is Latinx due to biases in recruitment, hiring, promotion, pay, and workforce culture. We say we want this, and yet we do an incredibly poor job of it. And as Katrine said in the intro, I'm not too convinced that we're going to get any better doing what we're doing. Because for one, we're in a pandemic now, so I think everything's tougher in a pandemic, we know that. But even before the pandemic, there was little or no unemployment in the San Francisco Bay Area. And these numbers didn't move in the Bay Area either, let alone the rest of the country, which may not be as liberal as I've heard, that the rest of the country is not as liberal as we are here in San Francisco Bay Area. I want to talk about, so here we are, we're awash with cash. We didn't make the needle move at all. I get this virtue signaling all the time, and this is what I call it, because I don't know if people really want to solve the problem. I think they want to be seen as wanting to solve the problem. I don't know if they really want to solve it. This just happened this week. Someone from Twitter posted on LinkedIn. I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn, probably not the best place, but they posted on LinkedIn. And the post said, Twitter is making a goal. We've seen this, as I said, we've seen this movie before. Twitter is making a goal to have 25% of their leaders be underrepresented minorities and 41% women by 2025. Now, one, that's 4 years away. And I thought, you know, wait a minute, I think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I just don't think they're going to make it. Because the track record from companies in the Bay Area is they come out with these great ideas, but when it comes to diversity and inclusion, they don't do it. Here's my response. Some of you probably saw it. While this may be applauded by many, I feel we've seen this movie before. And in the end, little changes, because goals without concrete behavioral changes are little more than virtue signaling. That's where the term comes from me. And then I went on to say, you know, I run a nonprofit. We've achieved a high degree of diversity and inclusion. I'm not convinced that these people really want to do it. And I did some calculations. Some of you are good at math. Who's good at math? I know Dave's good at math. That's why we have him doing the finances and things. Some of you might want to get a calculator out here. I did a little research because I got a little fired up about this. I think you all know, familiar with Twitter, right? You all heard of it before, this little outfit in San Francisco. Guy named Jack Dorsey is a CEO. I think you all know Jack Dorsey, right? I looked up Jack Dorsey's net worth just for fun. And according to Google, it's $15 billion. Now, I don't know if you know what a billion is, but I did another back of the matchbook calculation on $1 billion. Human civilization, as we know it, evolved. You didn't know I was going to start with human civilization. It's a long talk. I'm just kidding. Started 4000 BC in Mesopotamia. That's roughly 6,000 years. If you all will give me leave that we've been civilized as human beings for 6,000 years. If you worked, let's say we even were able to raise the minimum wage across the country to $15 an hour, which is where it should be. I'm a unrepentant liberal from San Francisco, so I think it should be 15. We do that $15 an hour for a year. How much money do you make? Anybody want to tell me, give or take? You work about 2,000 hours. You probably won't get those 2 weeks off. You make a little bit more. Let's say it's $30,000. If you made $30,000 and worked every year of your life since human history began, how much money would you make? It would be 30,000 times 6,000. Does anybody want to do the math on it? You could double check my math. That's $180 million. All right? It doesn't make sense to me. I don't believe, I know they exist, but I don't believe in billionaires. I think once you get to, this is an aside, once you get to $1 billion, they should give you a plaque, say you won. And then after that, we should tax you at 100% so that we can pay for healthcare and we can pay for kids' educations and we can forgive student debt and we can do all the things that we say we don't have money for. Even infrastructure might be good. That's why I'm an unrepentant liberal. Anyway, Jack's got 15 billion of these. So I did some more research. Approximately 13% of Twitter's current leadership is Black, Latinx, Indigenous, or multiracial, which is exactly what the other study showed, 13%. 38%, which is pretty much what the other studies show, is women. So they're right there in the same area of all the places that said, yay, we want this, and we haven't moved it an inch. So I did, anyway, they wanted to move this up here. So I started doing some more research, again, back of the napkin. So get your calculators out. Let's make sure I'm right about this one too. 4,600 employees at Twitter, that's it. Assuming that they're incredibly top heavy, I went with maybe 20% of their people would be considered executive leadership. It's not 20%, but let's just say for fun, it's 20%, right? How many people? We got 920 senior leaders that make up these percentages at Twitter. So that means that we have 350 women and 570 men. Still doing the math because we got 38% women. They want to get to only 50% in 5 years. I can get them there in less than a year is what I'm getting to. Because all I need to do to make it 50% is hire 220 women. We've had 600 plus women go through the Job Hackers program. So I bet you I could hire 220 women. I could hire them probably for less than this, but let's just say it's $250,000 a year. By my calculations, that came out to $55 million in salary and benefits for 1 year. I would solve this problem almost overnight. And if you take 15 billion and you subtract 55 million from Jack Dorsey's fortune, guess what he's got left? He's still got 15 billion left. It's a rounding error for him. So as I say, it's not that it's not easy to solve. The companies just don't have the resolve. I made that up the other day. I thought it sounded good. Trying it out with you guys. We could do the same with people of color. Maybe what I would do is of those 220 women that I'm going to hire for $55 million. Well, Jack, actually, my ask for Jack, if anybody knows Jack, anybody's from Twitter, I'm only asking for 60 million, 5 million for me, 55 million for everyone else. I'll call it a finder's fee. $60 million still doesn't even dent his wealth. I would maybe just hire women of color. Then I could kill two birds with one stone. I know all the women of color would be happy about that, I think, anyway, right? We can solve these problems. There are ways to solve these problems. We're not changing and we're not doing anything to do it. I gave you a very simple way to do it. Just throw money at the problem. I don't think that's a solution, but I solved it in 20 minutes with nothing more than Google searches. How do we do this? How do we do this really? I think that's pretty funny. So, I mean, seriously, if you know Jack and he's willing to give me $60 million, we'll solve the problem and I'll get rich. And that's good for everyone, or at least me. Here's what we do. Remember, we talked about the Philharmonics. What they did is they went so far as to putting carpet on the stage, so that there was no way for anybody to know ahead of time the race or the gender of the person who was playing, or even the age, because I think ageism is a thing as well, right? They didn't know. So the question for me is, there's a couple things that puzzled me as I'm thinking about this, because I think it's a very important issue. I think diversity is a very important issue, not just for what I would call diversity bingo of just checking off people's race and colors and sex and whatever. It's because diversity of ideas is what makes us innovative. It helps us financially. It's the right thing to do. So how do we carpet the stage in this, in the real world outside the Philharmonic? Well, there's a few things we can do. One, a lot of our contact in job search is resumes. And I just spent this last weekend looking at a bunch of different resumes. You can tell a lot about somebody just from the resume. When you think about things like race and age and sex, right? So if I do have biases, which we all do, because we're human beings, those biases can start to make a play, even though I don't know it, right? These are hidden biases. So what should we do? Here's what I propose. When we're advertising for a job, we don't need somebody's name on that resume. We can obfuscate it. We can take it out before the people who hire see it, because that's not important what your name is. But your name is going to give me your ethnicity. Except for, and Sue won't mind me on this, but Sue Bose, you get a pass on this one. You're not going to get mad at me for saying that, but some folks you can tell their race by their name because they have ethnic names. Addresses. Your address is going to give you a socioeconomic status in the Bay Area. We have certain areas that are, heavily one race or another race, and these are fairly known to people. I don't know if this plays into people's thing, but we don't need your address. What we need to know is, can you make it to work? This should be removed. Phone numbers should be removed, and I would say colleges as well. All of this stuff should be taken off before somebody starts looking at a resume and trying to hire somebody, because we need to carpet the stage. We need to make sure, we need to ensure that there is nothing other than the talents of the people here that is presented. And I think we should have hiring committees and not individuals. I think committees have a tendency, I don't like them, going through the job process, but I think committees have a tendency to check the biases. And we also, if we're smart, we would create diverse hiring committees, right? So that we could check all our biases. I think we should have third-party involvement. If we're not doing a good job of screening people, because we're screening out people for certain things, we should have third parties helping us with this. We should remove from jobs, this is a big one, by the way, remove from jobs as many prerequisites as possible. How many people have looked for a job? I mean, most of the people I work with, they're looking for work, 90% or more, where they have everything but the kitchen sink in the job descriptions and titles and the prerequisites, right? An entry-level job that needs 5 years experience, that's not an entry-level job. We need somebody in HR who understands this, and we need to remove this kitchen sink philosophy of we need everything in the world, because it's not going to work. What it's going to do is it's going to screen out those very people that you want for diversity. Because this is one of the number one things. This is what we hear, from the companies that I've talked to is, well, we would love to hire more people, more minorities, more women, but they don't have the talent. Well, because you're putting the bar for the talent way too high for the jobs that you have. You need to lower that bar. I would go so far as not even doing live interviews anymore, because the whole live interview process, especially the face-to-face interview, is filled with so many biases. I would go to maybe some kind of question and answer transcript or something like that. These are all things, I don't know if these will work. These are all ideas I could come up with rather quickly, because what I'm saying is we've got to find the equivalent of carpeting the stage, but we're not doing it. No HR department is doing these things that I'm aware of. Do they work? I don't know if we know. Have they tried? No. You cannot get different results by doing the same thing over and over again. That's the definition of insanity. The problem is the system. The current system will not work as it's architected. We heard about this during Black Lives Matter movement and all the stuff that's been going on in society about systemic racism. We have systemic racism, we have systemic sexism, we have systemic ageism in the system of hiring people. We need to change the system. We cannot just play around on the edges. And as much as I want to make fun of people not having the resolve and spending the money because they've got all this money and they could probably solve the problem if they really wanted to, that's not always the answer. Let's go through the past history. Knowledge of the problem, check. Companies know there's a problem. Desire to change, not really sure, but we'll say check. Money, check. Pressure, check. We have all these things. Have they changed? They haven't. There was no time before the pandemic in human history where the stars were aligned for us to take advantage of diversity more so than then, and we did nothing. We need to change the system. So, why is Job Hackers different? Why do we have the diversity? Well, look at some of the things we talked about before. Job Hackers, no one is turned away. We have never turned anybody away. If you feel that you can benefit from what we do, you're in. And so what we're really seeing in Job Hackers is we're not seeing this drive for diversity, though we do reach out to underserved communities because we think it's the right thing to do. What we see is we see a reflection of the people who are getting left behind. Does that make sense? We see the reflection of the people getting left behind because these are the people who are not getting work and they're coming to us looking for our assistance. We do not turn anybody away. We do not say that you do not have the prerequisite knowledge. We believe that everyone can learn what we have to teach. Now, granted, we're not a for-profit organization, so maybe we can do things a little bit easier. But what we learned is this from Job Hackers is that you need to keep the barriers to entry as low as possible. And you need to emphasize something that most organizations do not do, especially these days, and that is to emphasize potential over experience. Everyone who comes into our program, we believe, has the potential to learn what we have to teach. And they come to us from so many different walks of life, so many ages, so many races, so many countries these days. I want to say hi to B from Indonesia who joined us. One of my favorite Job Hackers. It's hard to be biased when all folks are welcome. So we need to remove the barriers. That's part of changing the system. One of the things that we're trying to do is actually we're trying to if we ever got funding, is we're trying to pay people. That's in our pro forma from years ago when we started this little nonprofit. We want to pay people because we know that even free education is a barrier for some people, right? Even some people, they can't make that time. So if we could pay them to come and train with us, we could remove that barrier as well. We believe and we know that the answer is twofold, and it's things that companies don't do well. It's internships, but internships are problematic in certain ways because internships tend to be young people. And the young people that go in tend to be people who have usually some kind of connection with either a particular college or particular people within the organization, which doesn't lead to as much diversity. I know that there's some companies doing better than others. The real key is apprenticeship, which so many companies aren't doing and so many companies are doing poorly, which is kind of what we're doing at Job Hackers, right? If we could hire people, bring them in, have them be apprentices, and then farm them out as employees to other organizations, that would be a great thing. We need tons of more apprenticeships. We need to pull people in with zero experience, but then work with them and invest in them at a company level, and you would change the game there as well. So, if Jack doesn't want to give me the 60 billion to hire 220 women, give me the 60 billion to set up an apprenticeship program, and then give us a couple more years and we'll change the equation. Because an apprenticeship program by its nature should take all who who could do it or have potential to do it, not just the experience to do it. A lot of the boot camps are taking people, a lot of the apprenticeships are taking people who already have experience. So again, bypassing the very people who need the assistance. What we want to do at Job Hackers as a long-term thing is not only do we want to have people be employees, but we want to bring work into Job Hackers like you would to a Deloitte and Touche or whatever, you know, one of those consulting companies, where we would have diverse teams who would work on that work. And they would be apprentices. Because our calculation would be, how can we build people of talent, not how do we hire people who already have it, right? And the good thing is as the people go through the program, they become mentors and other people. So what we've found is, as we've been very fortunate to work with a number of partners in areas that service underserved people, whether it be women or minorities or underserved communities, they bring people from the community with them. And the same would happen with apprenticeships, right? So this creates a virtuous cycle, as opposed to what we have now, which is really a vicious cycle. Because, you know, I do a talk on cognitive illusions. A lot of you job hackers are here. You heard it. I think it was just, you know, yesterday or the day before or whenever. We all have these biases. That doesn't make us bad. That makes us human, right? So we tend to hire people we're comfortable with, and we're comfortable with people who look like us. It's just that simple. So we have to really start to pull in people from diverse backgrounds so that they can continue to pull in more people from diverse backgrounds, right? There will be a part where you get to a certain percentage and it will just click. It's a tipping point. Anyway, talking about job hackers in our nonprofit, I would love to be in a position to provide services to other organizations to help them remove biases as well, by helping them by screening the resumes or removing some of the identifying information and teaching them to carpet the room, so to speak. So these are just some thoughts on how we can build a better system, but I will tell you with almost certainty that we're not going to get there by doing things as we've always done them. And I have no inkling in my mind that Twitter or anybody else who has these audacious goals, which I don't think are even that audacious, are going to meet those goals, because they're not changing the system. Until they change the system, they will continue to get the same things over and over. One last slide, and then we can talk about a whole bunch of other things. At the beginning of this presentation, I talked a lot about the numbers, what I would consider the economic argument for diversity. And that's a good argument to make, honestly, for businesses, because they'll pay attention. These are important arguments to make so that we can change the equation. The problem is, I think that these miss the point. And I almost don't want to use them, but I know these things might work. Maybe someday. The real argument is the moral argument. We cannot only make an argument about economics anymore, because these things should be a moral choice. We should do it because it's the right thing to do, not just because it's the right thing to do economically, right? I'm not a huge American history person, and this is Black History Month, and one of the things about Black History Month was the history of slavery in the United States. It was economically viable for the South. They didn't want to get rid of it. Why did we fight a civil war that tore this country apart? We fought a civil war because it was the right thing to do. It was the moral thing to do. So I don't think, I'm not saying we abandon the economic argument, but we cannot only use the economic argument. I think we need to continue to say this is a moral argument that everybody, regardless of age, race, gender, et cetera, has a seat at the table. And if for some reason they do not, we need to really concentrate and find a way to make that so. I think it's sad that we expect so little from our society these days in terms of morality, from both our corporations and our citizens. I think we've indulged ourselves too long in this fantasy of unfettered capitalism that we can no longer make the moral argument for people, and we need to check that. It's not about the money. Those who do well as humans for our fellow humans, the nonprofits who are doing the good work, the path forwards, upwardly global, right? JVC, et cetera, these nonprofits and the job hackers. Too long we find ourselves as beggars at the table, begging these capitalist companies whose founders are worth $15 billion and play around with the billion number a while. It's obscene. Our values are out of whack. And us hoping for the humanity, for the wisdom and the largesse of billionaires is almost perverted in my mind. We got to stop doing that. We got to stop being beggars. Why is it that so few should have so few should have so much and so many have such little? We need to start doing this politically. We need to start doing other things. I think this is what we saw some of this come to the fore just this past year, and things like social justice and Black Lives Matter. We must not rely on these people to create the new systems. We must start creating the new systems ourselves and stop waiting for others to do it. We must band together, and we must work to make this happen. If we want diverse companies, we need to create diverse companies. We need to come together with people who believe in the things that we do and start doing that. And that's what we've done, I think, to a great degree with job hackers. And I know this is the Agile Experts Club. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with Agile, but I appreciate the opportunity to share some of my thoughts and some of the things about diversity and inclusion that I think are important to all people. And happy to answer any questions, comments, or even talk about Agile if you like. That's it for me. Folks, questions, comments?
Yeah, Larry.
Great presentation, Larry. There's a few questions I saw earlier in the chat.
Okay. Donald, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I find that to some degree, I could see that this opens up a dialogue. And I think one of the success we have in Agile is transparency and trust. And I think you're sort of hitting on that note a little bit here. And I think that's what sort of a benefit to what you're bringing about is helping people be open to understand the problem, bringing out what's obviously something of an issue. So I appreciate it. That this is my 2 cents on my reflection on what you've told us.
Thank you, Donald. I appreciate that. I'm trying to look through some of the questions, but if you put some questions in there, if anybody has any other questions or things for me at present time.
Now there's one from Deep T. What would be your comment on Google AI ethics issue going on?
Oh gosh, I've only read a little bit about the Google AI ethics issue, so I don't know if I can weigh in too much on it. From what I see, this is the theme behind it is there's a lot of what I would consider virtue signaling. It's much easier to have your press officer send out a press release of something that you're doing to keep people quiet than it is to actually make meaningful change. And I think, this whole question of AI ethics falls into that. We know, for instance, if you look at something like the banking industry, and all the problems that we've seen over the years with the banking industry, they just factor some of this stuff into the cost. They'd rather not change their business model. They just figure every once in a while they're going to get their hands caught in the cookie jar, and they're going to pay the fine for it. I think with the Google AI, if my impression is correctly, they got kind of caught with their hands in the cookie jar, and it's blown up in their face a little bit. But I don't think that I don't see any of these large organizations making huge, meaningful change. Ethics should not be something that we add on. It reminds me of an Agile. It reminds me of DevOps. DevOps is not a thing that you add to Agile. DevOps is a mindset of how you do Agile. Having a separate ethics office is ludicrous. It should be baked into the system. So the fact that you have a separate ethics office is kind of like having a foosball table and saying you're a fun place to work, right? It's not endemic to the organization. It's an add-on. I feel the same way with as much as it pains me to say this, as again, unrepentant liberal, some of the D&I stuff that we do in organizations is we hire a D&I person, as if that's going to make that much difference. And we've seen, historically that it hasn't, because D&I should be something that's woven into the fabric and the DNA of the organization. So that's what I think about the ethics argument. And obviously, if you have just a bunch of white men doing programming for AI, you're probably going to get things that are skewed when it's let loose in the real world. That's not an ethical thing. That's just create a better product thing. It's just common sense, I think.
Thanks, Larry. We have a question from Regina, but I think there was one earlier that was all the way at the top. So I'm just going to read that really quick. It's from Michelle. Do you think relying on LinkedIn has made these issues better or worse when it comes to the issues that you mentioned earlier?
I use LinkedIn a lot, and I probably use it more than I should, but I got off Facebook a long time ago. I got off of Twitter a long time ago. And the reason I did is these things have become so much easier, along with bullying and all the other things that we want to talk about in social media that have really torn apart the country in some respects. It's just so much easier to virtue signal over Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn. It's just so much easier for me to post, I'm a good person, as opposed to actually being a good person. So I think it's hijacked our ability to really understand those who are doing meaningful stuff versus those who are saying they're doing meaningful stuff. I think, I don't know, Michelle, if we've talked about this before, but I've worked at some of the quote unquote best companies in the United States to work for. Not really. I've worked for some of the companies that have the best PR when it comes to being one of the best places to work for. So I think this virtue signaling is just exacerbated by the easy availability of typing anything into a thing. It'd take me 2 seconds to type something into LinkedIn. It'd take me a lifetime to build something that means something.
Can I jump in, Larry?
Yeah.
I actually posted that question while you were talking about the hiring and interviewing process.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, in terms of either adding to or reducing bias, if you think LinkedIn, specifically because we've all heard that you get more success if you post a profile picture, which says even more than your name on the top of a resume.
I don't think technology is necessarily a panacea for anything. So I think there's ways that it's helped us. It's helped me immensely. It's helped Job Hackers as a nonprofit immensely, that we can get the word out to so many people with so little effort. I don't know if it's helped the hiring process. I think the thing that's really killed the hiring process is when it becomes so much easier to solicit the resumes, which happened long before LinkedIn. Think back to Monster. When you put a job out there and you solicit 100 resumes, how the heck are you going to get through them, right? That is a huge, huge problem. So what we've done recently is we've tried to solve it through AI, which has only made it worse. Because what they're putting into the algorithms are the things that are kicking the people out that if we're truly looking for diversity and inclusion, shouldn't be kicked out. A lot of things I see, especially for women, is gaps. Women tend to be primary caregivers, so they have gaps. Throw that through an AI, let a machine read it. Machine says gap, kicks you out, right? So nobody ever sees it. So I think a lot of stuff we're doing with technology is far beyond our human comprehension, because our comprehension isn't that. Our comprehension was built on millions of years of evolution. It doesn't change in 20 years just because we now have computers and Instagram and Twitter and all that other stuff. That's why we see it most often, and I think in the political sphere, which is why I get sometimes pretty political, but thankfully I'm probably preaching to the choir here, because we see it. It's fractured. Social media is fractured. I mean, there's nobody, this is my opinion, obviously, but there's nobody who's worth $15 billion. As far as I'm concerned, Twitter's worth negative $15 billion for the damage that it's done through society. And just in the US political sphere over the last, 4 to 6, 8 years. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, Michelle, but I don't think it's getting any better. I don't think it helps us that much. That's why networking is always better. Who do you know? And it's better for the companies too. But that's problematic because your network tends to be people who look like you, right? So that's why I said we got to have some really simple things to try to remove those things. And I would start with resumes. Remove all that. Remove from the AI some of the crap that the AI is kicking things out, or at least know what the algorithm is doing. A lot of HR companies are using these algorithms. They have no idea what they're doing, right? So if we're lucky, we get to trick them. But the people who learn to trick them are probably not the people we want either, if we're looking for diversity and inclusion. Sorry, long answer, but thanks, Michelle. It's good to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle, for that answer. I'm going to read out, for your question. And thank you, Larry, for that very insightful answer. I'm going to read out.
I don't know if it was insightful, but it was long.
It was insightful. I was paying attention 1,000%. So this is Regina's question. While applying for a job, there is the optional questions that relate to gender, race, veteran status, etc. So
Yep.
How does this fit into your theory of diversity, granted if one populates the answers?
So my understanding of that, my wife actually asked me this question too. My wife, if a lot of you know Jana, she's Asian. She said, should I fill this in? Is it going to count against me? Far as I know, it doesn't count against anyone. Far as I know that this is randomized and it's only used for reporting purposes, and that it's not necessarily attached to anyone's name. If you think there's an issue with that, right, I'd say don't fill it out. It's optional. I don't think not filling it out is going to hurt you either. At least I don't have any indication that it does. So, if you're nervous about that, don't fill it out. I'd love to get it. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, and God knows if it'll ever happen, but I'd love to get it to a point where we don't have to ask those questions anymore. Honestly. We'll never be a colorblind society, but I'd like to get a point where we don't have to even ask those questions for reporting purposes and other things, because we've just done a good job, right? When you're doing a good job with something, you don't have to ask questions like that. It's readily apparent. Someday I believe that human beings are capable of great goodness and terrible things as well. So hopefully when it comes to that, we'll get better over time.
All right. In relation to that, we have a question from Deep T. How could the age bias be removed on LinkedIn?
Well, that's a tricky one too. One of the things I'm seeing, and if somebody's in HR, please bail me out here. I don't think that companies these days are looking far beyond what I would consider maybe 7 to 10 years of experience. So my advice for our more seasoned veterans is what I call them, the people you should hire because we've got experience, is don't show more than 7 to 10 years. And if you can get by with it, I wouldn't show any years in terms of college degrees or anything like that. I don't know. I mean, age bias is a thing. You get a bunch of old people like myself, put us in a room, we'll tell you age bias is a thing. We know it. We've felt it. It does, but it's a little more tricky than race and sex, which are, race and gender are much easier to identify. So I would say don't give them 20, you got 25 years experience, great. Don't give them 25 years of experience.
Thanks, Larry. Another question. This is from Alice. How do you address conflicts of interest from multiple groups who all have a hand in reviewing applicants? I think that's a really interesting question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We don't, I mean, I don't know if I know the answer to it. We don't at Job Hackers because, we take everybody. So it's not like we have some kind of committee like an admissions office or a school or anything like that, where we're saying, this person should go or this person should stay. I think one of the bigger things is first thing that we should learn as human beings when we're trying to attack this problem is that we all have biases. And I think that we're starting to do a good job of understanding that. I think the other thing that I recommend when I'm working with companies is let's not be afraid to have a point devil's advocate. In security, they call them red teams. People are going to take down the argument. The devil's advocate comes to us from the Catholics, where when they, put somebody up for a saint, then somebody got to advocate for the devil and why this person shouldn't be the saint, right? I think we need some of that within organizations, not just for diversity and candidates, but also to eliminate maybe some of the groupthink. Now, the question was posed from Alice was a slightly different question. I don't know if I can answer that one satisfactorily. Is what do you do with, diverse and competing teams? Not quite sure. I mean, dialogue, working out together. I don't have any pat answer for that one because I really haven't thought much about it.
Great. Does anyone have any other questions before we close our session? While Larry's still here.
Hey, Larry, just have a question. I work for a large organization, so a lot of the things that you're saying about ways to take some of the bias out of the hiring process make perfect sense. So I know large organizations typically try to do things to take cost out of the equation, hence all the problems with automation and whatnot.
Yep.
Are you seeing more positives, maybe with medium or smaller size organizations that have maybe moved in the direction of some of the things that you're proposing?
I haven't seen one way or another, but I would say that small organizations probably, people as we tend to hire people that look like us and are like us will probably not do well. Medium organizations probably do a little bit better. But I don't have any numbers behind it. It's just, general thinking behind it of what we should do. But I think, Brian, if you're part of a large organization, HR needs an overhaul. I think we all agree on that, especially the job seekers. And one of the overhauls is how are we really bringing in talent and really submitting things to Facebook or Monster or whatever you're submitting to is almost a loss. You're almost admitting defeat. We really should work within our networks to network with organizations like Job Hackers, shameless plug, Reboot Excel, who work with primarily women, Path Forward, who works primarily with women. You got places like Code Tenderloin, who's a partner of ours, who works in the Tenderloin of San Francisco. So, a lot of underrepresented folks who go through the Code Tenderloin program. If you're looking for these programs that exist, which I don't think most of the big companies are, you're going to have a really large pool of individuals to choose from. And I think that's the better way to go about it, because we're not the only program that's out there helping, women and minorities and underrepresented people. Companies just don't seek us out. Mm-hmm. Imagine, Brian, that through our program on a yearly basis, we have roughly 600 people from all over the United States all over the world, we have 12 countries represented, but all over the United States, who are heavily women and people of color. These are experienced people. These are people who had jobs, who have a great deal of experience because the average age is 43. These are seasoned professionals. My phone isn't ringing off the hook.
Yeah.
I go to companies, I say, look, I could literally drive a truckload of people through your front door who could do the work that you need to have done. Don't hear a thing. Why is that? That's my question to the bigger companies. Why is that? Why is my phone not off the hook? Why are we struggling with such a small budget? Why are we not funded more when we found some solutions? Those are questions that I just can't fathom the answer to.
They all make sense as questions. I'm not in HR for my organization.
No,
Yeah,
Brian,
it all makes sense to me. Yeah, no, it all makes sense to me. I wish, and the company I work for is actually one that, as you were saying, usually gets high remarks in diversity and for a lot of things, just about being a top place to work and whatnot.
Yep.
But I am fairly confident if I did go ask around in HR a lot, I think probably a lot of the things that you're talking about are not done. It's mostly just the typical put it through, resumes, through various things. There are aspects that where networking can help, but
Yep.
a lot of it, like you were saying, just is, put it through the meat grinder of all these different people, submitting in for a job. And then just a lot of them get discarded and never have a chance when they could actually be the perfect one. It just, the machine didn't process it the way
because
that
because
it would be looked at.
the machine doesn't look for, it looks for experience, right? It looks for what you've done. It doesn't look for potential, what you're capable of doing. And that's the real big equation that we need to flip. There's got to be a switch in somebody's brain that we got to flip to say, we're going to hire somebody because they got experience. I always ask people when they say, I've got 20 years experience, do you have one year of experience 20 times, or do you actually have 20 years of experience anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But even in software development, we know this to be true because the studies have shown us that past 6 months of experience, the amount of experience you have has no effect on the quality of your code and the productivity of the software developer. So why do we keep hiring somebody with, X number of years of experience or something like that, leaving behind the people who have the potential to be even better employees and move us closer to this diverse workplace? Again, these are the things I stay awake at night and scratch my head and wonder. But at night for me is I go to bed at 9:30 because I'm old. But I will say something though in the defense. I don't know how much time. I think I'm out of time. Or do I have more time until 5:30?
Yeah, there's plenty of time left. Don't worry.
Plenty of time. Well, see, I only had 10 slides. I finished early. I do want to give kudos to one company, not necessarily for the diversity, but for the pay that I worked for in the past, which was Salesforce. Because what Salesforce has done is Salesforce, if I remember correctly, the chief people officer at Salesforce was a woman. She went back to the CEO and said, look, there's a disparity. And the CEO said, show me the numbers. And then they went back and they actually adjusted salaries. So there's not a great salary disparity at Salesforce. I'm assuming this is still true. And I think that's something to be applauded. Great. I'm not saying it's a bad deal. We should do the same when we look at the kind of the numbers. And I don't want to play diversity by the numbers game. I just want to say that we know that it helps to be diverse. So let's seek it out and remove the barriers to actually achieving it, which I don't think any company is really doing that. But they removed the barrier to the salary question pretty darn quick. That's why I said, if you can get Jack Dorsey in a room and I can convince him to give me $60 million, I solved the problem in a year. If the CEO says this is going to happen and they put the money and resources and time and marshal the people to do it, it's going to happen. So we have to ask ourselves, why hasn't happened? Right. Any other questions? You guys have been great. Most of you are plants though, because you're from job hackers, but you're still great anyway.
There's a follow-up question from John. It's related to HR. I'm going to try to decode it. So is part of the problem because the HR professionals go to college for 4 years to learn HR, and is that what and this is what the colleges and teachers are teaching the HR folks? So is that the problem?
I think there's got to be some of that, but is anybody on here from HR? Because here I am railing against HR. So I want to say, if you're here, I'm not railing against you because you're smart enough to be here. What I found HR is HR. I don't like the term HR because HR stands for human resources. So I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit. Agile, we don't like the word resources. We like people. I think that the way we're educated, which is why part of the reason I created the Agile MBA, is that we don't understand knowledge work very well and how it differs. Because most of what I'm talking about, these companies, I'm talking about knowledge work. And that's really what we're talking about, is knowledge workers and knowledge work. Programmers, Scrum Masters, what have you. We don't fundamentally understand how people work is different than physical work. So a lot of these people, to call people human resources, I don't even like to start with. But my experience with human resources, and God knows I've worked at enough companies over the years, has been that their goal is to protect the company from lawsuit almost exclusively. So there's very little innovation or trying things because their fear is that we're going to get sued for something if we do something different. So they're almost by the book. And I can give you examples from my past, but I'll leave those out, where HR doesn't represent humans. They represent the company. So we need to change HR and how they view the world. This is the same thing I teach in the class. If we view the world, imperfectly, we'll still be okay. I mean, you still make money. You can't complain. Jack Dorsey's worth 15 billion. They're making money somewhere. We'll still make money, but it doesn't mean we're optimal. And HR is far from optimal. So I always say in agile transformations, if living in a perfect world for an agile transformation, the two places I want to get to is not working with teams. It's working with HR and working with finance, because this is where the incentives are built into the system, the money and HR. And the incentives that HR and finance are building into the system are the same incentives you would see at a factory. They have nothing to do, for the most part, with what knowledge workers are and what knowledge workers do. They have very little understanding of it. They don't incentivize it. And we wonder why we get strange behavior. If you want to change the behavior, change the incentives of the system. Right? That's why I say when we change the system, I mean change the incentives in the system and change the system as well.